Is Japan now the world's fourth largest economy or fifth? As two of the world's six largest economies, so the UK, I think, is firmly sixth, and Japan is fifth or fourth or third, depending. But clearly, you know, if we can collaborate, we have a lot going for us.
But I wanted to, you know, sort of start the discussion perhaps by going a little personal. You know, tell us a little bit about your engagement with Japan. Why did you pick Japan in the Foreign Office? And when did you come for the first time? And what was your first impression of Japan?
Great questions, Jesper. So you were going to say something about 4 decades, but anyway, I'll say it. I joined
That's the audience, right? Not the two of us.
I know. I joined the Foreign Ministry almost 40 years ago. And at the time, you might remember, some of you, Japan was the economy that was taking over the world. It was looking from Europe. It was a truly impressive place and a very exciting looking place. I joined the Foreign Ministry having studied languages at Cambridge University, easy languages, German and French. They're not actually that easy, but and I was very fascinated that the Foreign Office were very clear in their recruitment that they would need 1/3 of the intake of the fast stream civil servants joining the Foreign Ministry to learn a hard language. And they even tested our language learning aptitude before confirming that we'd got, you know, been accepted. So the idea of learning another language professionally, and when I looked at the list of those hard languages, you know, Japanese, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, Korean, Thai, Burmese, Japan really jumped out at me. And I think I will be forever grateful that that was the path I chose. So I arrived first having done 1 year of language training in London to do a second year in Kamakura in the summer of 1989. I think my first impression of Japan was, it's very hot.
Even then.
Yeah, this was the middle of August, and I think I'd never come across anything quite like it. And I remember the teachers in our school, we used to have a British Embassy school in Kamakura, they took the new students out, there were sort of 5 or 6 of us in the cohort, took us out for lunch, and we went to eat unagi. And I'm not sure it's politically correct to say one likes unagi these days. There are some issues about unagi's sustainability, but I think it is still my favourite food. Unaju in the middle of summer, and I will always remember that it's good for you because it replaces all the minerals that you lose when it's hot and sweaty. But Japan, I just don't think I really knew what to expect. You know, it was a developed economy. It was like nothing else I'd really come across. The culture and the you know, social norms were so different, and clearly from learning the language I had a way into all of that, but right. It was definitely a place to discover.
Right, yeah. Right. And then you know, Julia, you know, when you sort of step back now and sort of say, okay, you know, what are the 2 or 3, you know, sort of narratives or developments that have really, in your mind, in your personal mind, you know, have changed the most or have evolved the most over the last 40 years?
In Japan? So I think, what do I think? So the economy clearly has been a big thing. And I think it took a long time for Japanese people, having delivered this incredible economic miracle, knowing that everybody had worked so hard to achieve, you know, the second largest economy in the world. I think it was quite interesting to look on. I wasn't in Japan through most of the stagnation years, but I think the Japanese people have found it quite hard to get their heads around the fact that Japan's economy stopped growing. And that's produced some really interesting phenomena that you don't see anywhere else in the world. You know, what was it? The price of a Coca-Cola in a vending machine didn't increase for 30 years or something. And I think for Japanese people, now it's quite hard looking out around the world, and with the yen being so, I mean, it has been this week before, but being so weak, and not being quite sure how they feel about that. When I was here first, every young Japanese person wanted to go and study abroad. They wanted to learn English. They wanted to try to communicate in English. And I think that's one of the things I feel quite sad about, that that sort of outward-facing spirit and sort of internationalization, particularly for young people, that's a much tougher thing these days, and it's one of the things we're trying to do something about. I think the other thing I would say if you look at where Japan sits geographically and you look at the world around us, the whole security question has changed dramatically. And it's something, as the United Kingdom government, that we've been very closely involved in. We've been keen to see Japan do more. If you look back to 1989, 1990, there was a sense among Western diplomats, certainly, in our embassy, we would say Japan has benefited significantly from the post-war order, the open international economic system, the rules-based trading system. But gosh, we'd love Japan to step in a bit more to carry more of the burden of the peace and security balance side of what it means to be a country engaged in the international system. And we obviously understood the reasons why that wasn't possible, or why there were restrictions. And I think all the way through, we've tried to work closely with our Japanese counterparts, whether that was through the sort of initial peacekeeping mission that took a lot of debate in the parliament whilst I was here during my first posting, all the way through to now, whether that's joint equipment development through GCAP, which we're doing with Japan and Italy, or now the changes in rules around defence exports, and Japan sort of basically stepping up its capabilities, which we really welcome. I think a few things have triggered that. Certainly the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, I think, was a real watershed for Japanese people and a real moment of, kind of wake-up call, alongside the sort of sense of a growing threat from China, but which has been a sort of slower burn, if you like. There was never sort of one big moment that was sufficient to cause a big shift. So I think those two things, have been things that have changed significantly through the time I've been engaging with Japan.
Tell us a little bit about the security relationship between Japan and the UK. I mean, there's obviously, the superpower America, doing all the heavy lifting and sort of setting a lot of the tone, but this joint fighter jet experience in particular, where did that come from? Was it you, or?
I may have been, agitating, let's say, but I think fundamentally the UK and historically, we have been partners through history at different points in time that have been important moments, particularly in Japan's history. We had the Anglo-Japanese alliance at the start of the 1900s. We had William Adams back in 1600, who was the first Brit to arrive in Japan, who helped the shogun to negotiate with the foreigners. We're seafaring nations. We have a lot of, the Japanese Navy is basically the first ship. The Mikasa was built in Barrow-in-Furness in the northwest of England. These connections go back a long way. General Togo studied Lord Nelson's battle tactics to win against the Russians. All of these things provide a sort of grounding. But I think what we have as two countries is a shared respect and a shared trust in each other, that means that when we partner in something like the most sensitive defense technology, we're true partners. And, you know, I don't want to say too much about our American friends. I mean, clearly the US is the ally, our key ally for both of us. But we do know that when Japan works with the United States, it is not treated as an equal partner. There is an imbalance in that partnership. And I think what the UK and Japan can do together is make the most of each other's strengths. And we have strengths in different places, but when you combine them and in a true partnership of trust, there is a lot we can do together. So the GCAP idea came actually out of, I think the UK pitched initially to try to win the platform contract for this new capability that Japan needed to replace its F-35s. We didn't win, the US won, but we immediately started talking about engine collaboration because the engine was the part that the UK and Japan had real strengths in, and we thought maybe we could be the partner to develop the engine together for the new combat air capability Japan needed. And the more those discussions went on, and I wasn't involved in the detail, but what I observed was the degree of like-minded sort of thinking and trust between the officials in ATLA on the one side and the United Kingdom's defence procurement people on the other side and technology people, that it just sort of grew. In my view, it grew organically to a point where they each said to the other, well, if we could do this engine thing together, couldn't we do the whole thing together? And then one thing led to another. We obviously had to manage fairly sensitively the fact that the US had won the contract and sort of, you know, make sure that there was no opposition to it. But that was where it started. And then, you know, we were keen to make sure that there was another European partner involved. And Italy is a long-standing defence partner of the United Kingdom. And so the three-way GCAP partnership was born.
Can I probe a little bit when you say like-minded thinking? You know, what does that mean? Is that thinking of wanting to be or having a window of independence from the United States dominance, which both countries sort of share? Is it, you know, the new global realities of middle powers having to work together to pull any weight? Where did that? Because it's from a Japanese perspective, there's quite a risk-taking, right, vis-a-vis the United States, right?
So I think I would avoid sort of retrofitting those things to a decision to partner together in GCAP. What I actually mean is a sort of a strong sense that we often notice when UK and Japanese officials or even businesses work together, that there is something culturally similar. And, you know, whether it's a bit of politeness and respect mixed in with a kind of clarity and a pragmatism about what you're trying to achieve. Certainly, in terms of the complementarity part, you know, the Japanese have incredible industrial strengths, clearly. The UK has way more experience of working in the international defence equipment field, in defence exports and sales internationally, and way more operational experience for all the obvious reasons. And so I just think there's this sense that the two together can truly complementary, but sort of make up for each other or sort of respect each other's strengths, but also can compensate for each other's gaps or weaknesses in a way. And yeah, sure, since the GCAP deal was agreed, the world has continued to change quite dramatically. And so it is important that we each have some sovereign technologies and sovereign capabilities or shared sovereign capabilities. But I wouldn't say that was a driving force initially for GCAP. But for sure, as I was looking up this morning, is Japan now the world's fourth largest economy or fifth largest
Depends
economy? It moves around a bit, but anyway,
purchasing power parity measure you
as
use.
the world's, as two of the world's six largest economies, so the UK I think is firmly sixth, and Japan is fifth or fourth or third, depending. But clearly, if we can collaborate, we have a lot going for us. And I think the like-minded thing is also about how we see the world and what matters. And, a world that operates by rules, and the United Kingdom has always played a big part in creating those rules, a world that, provides some degree of predictability and respects the rule of law. Those are definitely things on which we are like-minded. And an example of that is the UK joining CPTPP, which has happened in the time I've been here as ambassador, 2 years ago, last December. It's truly an interesting example of the two countries working together in a new version of a rules-based international trading organisation that, where we are the two largest economies, that we believe that these sort of constructs and rules-based collectives are, have an important role to play.
It's interesting, you talk about the similarities and obviously the proud history of the British Navy, the Japanese Navy. The big difference is that, of course, the Japanese took over the bureaucracy from somewhere between Germany and France, probably picking the worst elements of both. Talk to me a little bit about your experiences with the Japanese bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Would you like a little wine?
No, I mean, the first thing to say is we have incredibly strong relationships with our Japanese counterparts. And what's always really striking is, Japan, for all that we have these similarities, we are a long way away from each other. And, when people talk about cultural similarities, it's interesting, there is a sort of line that says, the UK and Japan are culturally very close. And then I see people look at me rather oddly and think, what on earth is she talking about? And I say, well, actually, seen from Japan, when Japanese people look out at the world, I think the United Kingdom is a place that they sort of feel an affinity with and culturally, sort of a mutual respect. Whether most British people get that. I think once they come to Japan, they do feel that. And with Japanese officials, what's interesting is we encourage as much as we can our colleagues in government in the UK to come and visit Japan. You cannot substitute for coming here in person and experiencing this place. And what happens always is that when our colleagues arrive and they start a conversation, whether it's on, from health policy to science and technology to foreign policy, they find that they can really engage and connect and find common ground and this kind of mutual respect. And it's really striking how so many colleagues or even ministers will arrive from the UK sort of slightly terrified. What is this country? I've heard Japan's a bit complicated and the culture's very different. And I just say, and they say, what cultural tips have you got? And I say, just be respectful and polite and be yourself, and you will find everything works just perfectly. Don't worry too much about bowing or business cards or, And I think that's really interesting. So what was your question again? I'm coming to it.
I know you are.
What was the question?
The bureaucracy.
The bureaucracy.
Yes.
So at the same time, when we in the embassy here are working regularly with colleagues in the Japanese system, I think there are some cultural issues that mitigate against innovation and risk-taking. And in the British bureaucracy, believe it or not, and maybe we are different from some of the other Europeans as well, civil servants are incentivized. I mean, we don't have many incentives, but anyway, you are well thought of if you come up with new ideas, if you find new ways to address problems, if you can deliver a more efficient way of delivering public services to the British people. If you try something new and it doesn't quite work out, but you've tried it, and I think we've can find that is a hard sell sometimes with our Japanese counterparts, because the Japanese bureaucracy is much more geared to a system where if you keep your head, sorry, I'm going to vastly generalize here, keep your head down and don't make any mistakes and don't take risks that might be seen as as not good, then you might not continue to progress and get your promotion every 2 years. In the UK system, it's much more based on meritocracy. It's based on what you've actually delivered. Young people can get to very senior positions. We don't have you've got to definitely do 2 or 3 years in this job before you can move to that job. There's a lot more movement and freedom within our system for people to be entrepreneurial and to sort of make a mark for themselves by doing things differently. And I think that's the difference that can sometimes mean it's not always easy. Having said that, again, our relationships at the moment with the Japanese government system are incredibly strong. We work incredibly closely with METI right across the different industrial sectors, across economic security, in energy and renewables. And there are a lot of people who are sort of, they're coming with us on this journey of trying to do things differently, creating some new initiatives, and trying to get some big things done that matter to both our countries and the rest of the world.
Your Excellency, you were a path breaker. I think you were of the major G7 countries. You were one of the first female ambassadors sent to Japan. I think now of the G7, with the honorable exception of America, I think all the ambassadors are female, if I understand this correctly, right? Is Italy still in the G7? Okay, well, so never mind.
I'm not sure if you're talking about ambassadors in Japan or around the world.
Ambassadors in Japan.
Yes.
You
look
very smart when Takaichi invited all the female ambassadors, right? It was very nice because this like 10 years ago that would have been like 2, and now it was like a whole group. So you had fun with Takaichi.
We did.
What did you talk about? State secrets.
We talked about all kinds of things, but. Actually, there was a very interesting point that she made, which I think may have come out, and it's not a secret anyway, but she said something, the collected female ambassadors congratulated her on breaking a glass ceiling, and reminded her that young women throughout Japan would be watching very carefully as, for the first time, a woman has taken the role of Prime Minister in Japan, and not to underestimate the importance of that. And she said something like, yes, I have broken a glass ceiling, but we also have this saying about a glass cliff. And I hadn't actually heard of this before. Had you? So a woman, might break through the ceiling and take the senior job, but people can be quite quick to, or sort of prepared to see them. They give a woman a very difficult job in which it's relatively easy to fail, and then when they fall down the glass cliff, they say, "Well, you see, there you go." It's because it's a woman who was doing the job. And I thought that was quite interesting, that she was conscious of the challenges of taking on the job that she's taken on.
Right. You cannot be what you cannot see, and so from that perspective, I think the impact is enormous, both obviously for Takaichi, for Finance Minister Katayama, as well as, for the global community with the ambassadorships here.
Yeah. It's very important.
What's been your biggest frustration? dealing with the Germans. Yes.
Well, the Germans, incidentally, had a female ambassador in Japan before we did, and a German was the EU ambassador in Japan as well before I arrived. So well done to the Germans. So I think actually there is something about the pace of change around female empowerment, and it's definitely things have definitely changed. But it has been very slow. Famously, I gave an interview, famously, maybe not famously, for me anyway, I gave an interview to the Nikkei about women's empowerment. And in the interview, I said, yeah, I think Japan is probably 30 to 40 years behind the UK. And of course, they printed the headline, Japan, Ambassador says Japan's 40 years behind the UK. But I said it very consciously because when I joined the Foreign Ministry 40 years ago, all of the legal and regulatory barriers had been cleared away. The Equal Equalities Acts and the equal employment rights and all of those things were in place. Even the university I went to, the college I went to at Cambridge, I was in the sort of first year after every year had a woman in that college. So it was year 4 of same-sex, students in the college. And so I never faced any actual barriers to anything that I wanted to do as a woman. And I actually feel very grateful for that I didn't have to be the one fighting. But what I did have to do was help to create, as you said, you can't be what you can't see. I had to be the one, along with my colleagues, to say, well, this hasn't been done yet, but I think I can do it. Or if you will allow me to, or if you can provide me with this support, I can do this thing. So we were sort of inventing the new, even though all of the foundations were there. And I think that's where Japan is now. So Japan has all of the right infrastructure and employee support measures and legal structures in place. But the challenge is that not many women have yet succeeded in doing all of these things in a way that it has been normalized. And so I think hopefully things can move a bit faster in the years ahead so that Japan can start to catch up with others rather than fall further behind.
Yeah. Let me, please prepare your questions. Let me pivot to one, the relationship between Great Britain, the UK, and Japan. I mean, there's obviously a proud history of exchange between the emperor, the emperor's family, studying, in the UK, long, deep tradition there. How does the royal and imperial aspect, how does that play into the relationship?
I think it plays enormously, actually. And it's very easy to say, we have a royal family, Japan has an imperial family, this is a sort of at the heart of the relationship. But I think I've really felt that whilst I've been here, I've felt what it actually means. Interestingly, it was one of the greatest honours, I think, as an ambassador. It's an odd thing to say, but to be here as ambassador when the Queen passed away, because it was just so striking how much the Japanese population cared about her, respected her, and saw her as a key figure for Japan as well as for the United Kingdom. The King's coronation, all the people who said to me, "Oh yes, I was watching it on the BBC." There's a real affinity, and going with the Emperor and Empress on their state visit to the UK in June 2024, seeing how at home they felt, actually. They both studied at Oxford at different times, but just how sort of joyful they were to be back in the United Kingdom. And then the fact that other members of the imperial family, from the Crown Prince to the current princesses, several of them, to Princess Takamado and so on, they have this really strong connection with the UK, which I think counts for an awful lot. And that sort of consistency and steadiness that it brings a country and its outlook and its traditions of having a royal and imperial family, and the fact that they have such strong connections, I think is very special.
At the risk of making a faux pas, I was in the UK during Golden Week when the King was in Washington. And, you know, I'm German.
Didn't he do well?
So my question was, you know, whether, in your personal opinion, I mean, could the Japanese emperor play that kind of role?
Yes, but you know I have no personal opinion in this.
Right.
No, all I would say is, I think it was, you know, it was an incredible example of the power of a monarch and of the British monarch.
No, it was really. I mean, Kathy and I were both in London at the time, and it was incredible. From the cab driver to the garbage collector to the, you know, aristocracy, they were all like they felt proud of being English, of being British. You know, wow, this was very, very, very powerful.
But I think, you know, what he represents and what he represented there was the thing I talked about at the beginning, this grounding or the kind of the belief in values and principles, which I think is what both imperial and royal families represent sort of with their country.
The thing that is incredibly striking, I don't know, many of you have probably visited London or the UK over the last year or so. Why are you so down on yourself? It is, you know, it is, you know, this is like, wow.
Did you have a good time?
I had an awesome time. I mean, it was...
Everybody, please come to London. Or the UK, I mean, it's not just London.
But it's also like, I mean, you know, if you do any sort of inklings of business there, right? You know, whether anything sort of advanced frontier stuff, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's quantum computing, whether it's precision engineering, I mean, the UK is there, but...
Yeah. So I cannot answer the question about why we are so down on ourselves, but it drives me crazy. And, you know, as ambassador, my job is to work out how to communicate with the people and the government and the representatives of Japan what the UK is, what we stand for, why we matter, and why you should want to work with us and be our partners. And I think it's the best job in the world, by the way, particularly doing it in Japan. But there is so much material, you know, I mean, and it's not material, it's true. There's so much evidence to deploy, you know, why we're amazing at offshore wind. You know, we're the second, have the second largest capacity in the world, offshore wind production. Why are we good at science and technology and these incredible institutions we have, you know, Cambridge, Oxford, Imperial, Glasgow, you know, we do robotics, we're the third best in the world at AI. But we're sort of struggling to compete with the scale of China and the US. But that's why if we can partner with Japan in particular, we can take on, you know, we can be competitive. So I can talk endlessly about all these things. But when I go home, you know, I say to my friends, you know, and of course, you know, we're, you know, renewable energy, I'll say, and they'll go, oh God, we're rubbish at that. I'm like, no, we're not. Have you not seen the evidence? But I think the one thing that amazes me, this is the bit I can't quite compute. The UK media is world, you know, so the UK media is trusted around the world. You know, we are trusted for being open, honest, you know, the Financial Times, The Economist, you know, these, and more, you know, like the Daily Mail because it's free and the Guardian because it's free. But why is it that when our media is so negative about our own country, you haven't all given up on us already? So that maybe there's just still something about this, the principle of sort of openness and free media that just adds to the standing and respect for the UK, that means the rest of the world sort of, even though they read all of this really negative stuff, they haven't given up on us yet. And I often have to say to people back home, you know, we are really respected around the world. This is the thing that gets them the most. What? You know, like there is so much to play for, and it doesn't really make sense. You know, we may still be the sixth largest economy, but, you know, we have kind of shrunk from, you know, being one of the leading countries in the world. But yet we have a lot going for us. And I think maybe I need to stop being an ambassador overseas and go back and be an ambassador at home.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your insightful views to Japan and the world. My question is that Japan is, as you know, facing the shortage of labor force due to the decreasing number of population.
Yeah.
So then I think it's the same issue to the UK. So do you have any advice to how to accept the immigrants, labor force, and to be the part of our society?
Yeah, interesting question. So the UK population is not shrinking as fast as the Japanese population. Our birth rate is below the replacement rate, but it's not too bad. And yes, we have traditionally had a lot of immigration into the United Kingdom, including from the Commonwealth and from countries with which we've historically had a close association. I hesitate to offer advice on how to make this succeed. I think in the United Kingdom, for a long time, actually, immigration was a success story, that we genuinely see people from different ethnic backgrounds as British and as part of our society, and that we celebrate the diversity that brings to our society. I think that's really still a very big, strong point of the United Kingdom. But I can't deny that immigration has become a political issue much more than it was in the past, mainly illegal immigration, but the whole Brexit, vote to leave the EU was driven to an extent by negative opinions about immigration from Eastern Europe, for example. So I'm not going to sort of stand on my high horse and say this is how to do it. But in terms of Japan, I do think there's a kind of gap in the debate that's sort of saying we have a shrinking population and we don't quite have a solution yet, and the sort of the foreigner issue, the Negaikokujin mondai, which I think the government could do a better job of being clear what it is that's a problem, rather than implying that all foreigners are a problem. And incidentally, I don't think that the Takaichi government is anti-foreigner. I think actually what they are trying to do is very sensible, and which maybe sometimes we didn't do sufficiently in the UK, which is when people think there is a problem of whether it's illegal migration or people able to buy land without it being transparent, or making, sort of increasing the, raising the bar for how easy it is to get the visas to settle, or that kind of thing. I think it's probably very sensible that the government is addressing those areas of regulation, which, although immigration's been very low in Japan in the past, actually those, partly because naturally it was low, those things never really had to be dealt with. But what I do think is that Japan needs international talent. And I think all of the people in business in Japan know this. And I think people, honestly, in the government know it too. So it'll be interesting to see how the Japanese government promotes the flow of talented people internationally, both from Japan going out as well as from outside coming back in. Because I always think Japan is most successful when it is outward facing and engaged with the world. And we need that Japan. We need Japan to be that in the future. And I think there is so much that's appealing about, we first came to Japan when in the bubble, era when it was full of expats like Jesper, who never left, right? And Deb over there, who also never left. But then it sort of dropped off and people weren't really coming to Japan in that same way. I think that's starting again now. And we're seeing the big UK tech companies established in Japan now. This flow of business isn't just Japan's investment into the UK or exports. The balance of trade between the UK and Japan now is in balance. It's pretty equal in both directions. And what the new phenomenon is that UK companies are now coming to establish in Japan. And of course, you need Japanese language to operate in the Japanese market. But I think I'm hoping that this flow of people and talent and cross-fertilization of ideas is a very positive thing. And I really hope that will continue.
My question is, you mentioned about our Japanese international role in terms of security. And then I think about that, comes to my mind is US-Japan security treaty. So my first question is, UK has which countries you have the security treaty? And in the future, maybe it takes time, but in the future, there is a possibility of the UK-Japan security treaty issue on the table as discussion?
It's a really interesting question. So the United Kingdom has many treaty partners, basically NATO. So as a NATO member, we share under the NATO treaty a commitment to each other's security. So that is the United States, but it's also all of the European members of NATO. So that's quite a normal thing for us. And, there's a big debate happening about NATO right now, but I think NATO is not going away and NATO will continue to play a really important role and be at the heart of the UK's security. As I mentioned, the UK did have a treaty with Japan back in the early 1900s, which didn't last, but it was a moment in history. I think it's highly unlikely that the UK and Japan would ever have a NATO-like treaty, one that said, if you're attacked, we will absolutely come, to your defence. A mutual defence treaty is highly unlikely. But I think something in between is quite possible. And actually, the United Kingdom signed a treaty with Germany just recently. Even though Germany is in NATO, Germany's in the EU, we signed I think we have just signed it. We agreed that we were going to negotiate.
But we will definitely attack each other.
No, no, but it's not a mutual security treaty. But it is a treaty that sort of sets out some clear commitments each to the other, and is a statement of kind of trust and shared interests at a level of sovereignty. And I think that kind of thing is possible with Japan. And it's the kind of thing that we're quite interested in to send a strong signal.
Yeah, so we heard a lot about security and defense, and King Charles and Prince William both are advocates of nature as well.
Yeah.
And King Charles came up with a Terra Carta for nature, and Prince William also started this decade with the Earthshot Prize. So we are actually an official partner of the Earthshot Prize.
Congratulations.
And, yeah, so I wanted to ask, in this kind of climate and atmosphere where people discuss more and more security and where capital is actually flowing more and more towards defense, we were also talking about collaboration between the countries, and the question is how could we shift the narrative again towards a hopeful future, so that, I mean, we have these conflicts in the Middle East, we have the Russia-Ukraine conflict and maybe other conflicts as well, and a certain level of security and defense is always necessary and important, but so my question is basically, Also, from the viewpoint of a diplomat, you have a lot of experience internationally. How can we really encourage people to think positive, also with AI, AGI, and all the possibilities which are coming now for us, which open tremendous opportunities for creating a better tomorrow, basically?
Yeah, it's really another really interesting question, and I think it's one area where I think there are some differences between the UK and Japan. So I think if you asked young people in the United Kingdom what their sort of top priorities are in order, nature and the environment would be pretty high up the list. And I think as a society, there's been a lot of work done on engaging people in the importance of the planet for our future. I mean, it's kind of undeniable, although some people may still deny it. Right? I think the difference in Japan. Yeah, sorry, you missed that, but yeah. The difference in Japan is that whilst nature has always been at the heart of Japanese culture and religion as well, I'm not really sure that how should I put this, that the sort of message really cuts through that we can do all of these amazing things economically and industrially, but ultimately if we don't preserve the planet and the environment in which they exist, we won't have a future. And I think that may be one of the areas I would say I'm a bit disappointed that that debate is not stronger in Japan. Nonetheless, we do work together in a lot of areas linked to nature, to energy. We have a very strong renewable energy partnership. The offshore wind industry that I talked about in the UK, in the last 10 years, 1/3 of the investment that's gone into that has been from Japan. So Japanese large corporates are all investing in the UK's offshore wind industry. And what we're now looking to do is create a partnership that says, and we've got various agreements in place, that the UK and Japan together want to be partners in renewable energy, but also the supply chain and technology to support the industry, and that the partnerships that have been made in the UK should now be brought back to Japan to help grow Japan's renewable, particularly offshore wind industry, including floating offshore wind. So there's a lot that we're doing in that area. And broadly, Japan is a strong supporter in international organisations of targets on nature and so on. But I'd sort of like to see a bit more public engagement here on that. And fundamentally, it's the one thing that's not going to change, right? We can have politics come and go, but if we're not addressing the challenges to the environment, then we're all going to suffer, basically.
I've got somewhat of a flippant question as opposed to a deep and meaningful one. In terms of your job and the work that you do here in UK statecraft, do you look at other countries and what they're doing and think, oh, that's clever, we should do something like that? Thinking of, I think I'm from Australia and I know the Australians go hard, but I was walking past the Italian embassy the other day on my way to KO, and I was like thinking, I don't see what the Italians are doing. I don't know what the Swiss are doing, the Americans obviously. But do you sort of take notes and think, well, that's clever. Maybe we should talk to our science people, or maybe Macron just sort of went to see Massa. Maybe Keir or Wes should go and see Massa. Do you sort of think in those terms?
Of course. Particularly when it's the Australians. Right. No. So in the world of diplomacy, there are times when we collaborate, and I think there are times when we compete as well. And I think what's really interesting is just how important Japan is to countries all around the world. When you sit in the job that I'm in and you see and you know other ambassadors, and you absolutely see what they're doing, and you follow which state head of state has just been to visit, and what was in the agreement, and are they copying us, or have they thought of something we haven't thought of? Of course we do that. But I think what's really striking is just the level of representation of countries from around the world in Japan. I mean, I feel very humble, actually. Most of the African ambassadors here are either former advisors to their president, or, the Afghani stood for election as president of Afghanistan, or, from developing countries. They're all people who have, they can just call up their president or prime minister direct, because Japan is such an important partner for them. So there's no shortage of competition. And the bandwidth, of course, of any country to engage in, in foreign relations will always be limited. So it is a competition. Can we arrange for our prime minister to come to Japan? Will we get the time of the prime minister if he comes? What do we read into that? Do we feel that we're in the right place and we're getting the right degree of attention and access, or do we feel that we're perhaps falling behind somebody else? So my team will tell you, Emily's here from my political team, there are moments when I'm very excited about sort of how strong I think the UK-Japan partnership is, and all the great things that we're achieving. It doesn't take much before I'm then turning to them the next day and saying, "Come on, the French are doing this, or the Australians are doing that. We've got to, keep up the work." But it's friendly competition, I think, in the main.
We had one more question.
And by the way, we do describe Australia as Japan's next closest defence partner after the US and then the UK. But you're in the region, so I think you have certain advantages. But we're definitely but we also work together very closely.
Thank you. Ambassador, you talked about increasing number of channels of collaboration between the UK and Japan, and I'm sure one of them would be in relation to China. The need to balance systemic resilience, as well as the need to integrate commercially into the Chinese market. And for someone whose background spans across all spheres, I'm a Chinese-born British national who now lives and works here. I'm particularly curious about your perspective on what you think perhaps is the biggest collective achievement in this balancing act, as well as what might be the greatest challenge going forward if we have a crystal ball. Thank you.
So between the UK and China, or UK, Japan? Yes, yeah. So the policies, or the kind of strategic positioning of the UK and Japan towards China are actually very similar. They don't always sound similar. Sometimes the kind of narrative around it can be very different. But fundamentally, we both want to be able to engage with China, having engagement, having a relationship where we can communicate and where we can try to influence the direction of travel and so on is really, really important. Sometimes we're able to do that, and sometimes we're not. Sometimes one of us is able to do that, and sometimes the other one is not. That's not something necessarily that we control. At the same time, we want to be able to work with China on sort of growth opportunities, on economic and trade opportunities, and that's really important for both countries. Japan's economic interdependence with China is, I think it's the biggest interrelationship, isn't it, for Japan's economy? So it's clearly very, very important. And for the UK too, we are sort of pursuing that economic opportunity with China, including Chinese investment in the UK. But then third, we both are managing very carefully the security challenges that emanate from China, and they feel very different. They feel different for each of us. For Japan, that's clearly as a neighbour, with China as a regional actor, becoming stronger in its defence capabilities and potentially more aggressive. That's felt very strongly in Japan. For the UK, it's more in terms of intervention in the matters of our state, in espionage cases, in cybersecurity challenges, you name it. We're very, very conscious of these things in the UK, and both of us have to play a sort of balancing act in terms of managing public opinion in a way that allows us to continue to pursue the goals that we have with China. So there are times when the China debate gets sort of stronger in Japan from time to time, and what the UK might be trying to do with China becomes what should I say, not a lever, but something that suddenly there's a lot more attention paid to. And the way I think we deal with that best is just by saying, look, let's just be normal about this. Whether our Prime Minister visits China or Japan first, sometimes there's just a practical thing involved. And I think the best thing is to avoid that becoming a big issue. Of course, it is seen to send a signal, but ultimately we should trust each other enough. The fundamentals of the UK-Japan relationship and our own shared interests and values should count for more than worrying about the sort of diplomatic theatre, if you like. It won't always work, but I think that's how I've tried to manage it, rather than over-focusing on the drama, keeping things kind of pragmatic and relying on the sort of strong fundamentals of the partnership.
It's a very American approach. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.